The 23rd of March 1938. The dusty plains of southern Shandong province, China. The ground does not simply shake, it vibrates with a rhythmic, mechanical arrogance. Under the pale spring sun, the Type 89 Igo medium tanks of the Imperial Japanese Army's 10th Division tear through the yellow earth, their tracks grinding the ancient soil into suffocating clouds of dust. Perched atop their steel beasts, Japanese tank commanders ride with their hatches open, goggles resting casually on their foreheads, cigarettes dangling from their lips. Why button up? Why hide? To them, the war is already won. The 3-month promise to conquer China has passed, yes, but Nanking has fallen. The capital is theirs. The enemy is retreating. This is not a battle march. In their minds, it is a victory parade that has simply dragged on a few miles too long. General Isogai Rensuke, commanding the 10th Division, looks at his map with the disdain of a man swatting a fly. His objective is Shuzhou, a vital railway junction. Standing in his way is nothing but the town of Taierzhuang, an insignificant dot on the map, a cluster of grey brick walls and tiled roofs situated on the bank of the Grand Canal. Isogai is not worried about the Chinese defenders. Intelligence reports describe them as a motley crew, provincial warlord troops, poorly equipped, lacking heavy artillery, and demoralized by months of defeat. The Japanese officers joke over sake in their field tents that the Chinamen will run at the first sight of the rising sun flag. This is the fatal mistake, the specific brand of hubris that rots an army from the inside out. What Isogai does not see, or chooses to ignore, is the silence inside Taierzhuang. It is not the silence of abandonment, it is the silence of a held breath. Inside the battered walls, General Li Zongren has not stationed cowards. He has deployed the Chinese 31st Division. These men are armed with Hanyang 88 rifles antiques compared to the Japanese Arisakas and big sword units, soldiers wielding traditional Dadao broadswords because they lack bayonets. They are not waiting to run, they are waiting to die, but they intend to take the invincible Imperial Army with them. As the Japanese vanguard approaches the northern gate, the air is thick with the smell of diesel and unwashed bodies. The roar of the artillery tractors drowns out the wind. The Japanese soldiers, confident in their superior air support and heavy guns, do not bother to spread out in cautious tactical formations. They bunch up, eager to punch through this annoyance and race their rivals in the 5th Division to Shuzhou. They see the crumbling walls of the town ahead. They see a tomb. They just don't realize yet that the tomb has been dug for them. The first shot doesn't come from a tank. It comes from the crack of a solitary rifle from the watchtower. It is the signal. The invincible blunder has begun. The Japanese artillery barrage that follows is textbook. It is precise, thunderous, and scientifically designed to break morale. 75mm mountain guns and heavy howitzers pound the northern walls of Taierzhuang until the grey bricks turn into a jagged ramp of rubble. To General Isogai's field commanders, the breach looks inviting. It looks like an open door. On the morning of March 24th, confident infantry squads from the 10th Division surge forward, bayonets fixed, screaming banzai as they scramble over the debris, expecting to mop up the survivors. They do not find survivors cowering in holes. They find a labyrinth of death. As the first wave of Japanese infantry pushes into the narrow streets, the trap snaps shut. Taierzhuang is not a modern city. It is a maze of tightly packed stone houses, narrow alleys, and winding canals. The Japanese superiority in heavy armor, their pride and joy, suddenly becomes a liability. The Type 89 tanks, so fearsome on the open plains, are too wide for the alleys. They grind to a halt, their turrets unable to rotate, their engines overheating, transforming into static steel coffins. From the rooftops, a rain of hand grenades descends. But these are not just standard-issue fragmentation grenades. These are potato smashers, bundled together by the half-dozen, hurled by Chinese soldiers who have practically fused themselves with the architecture. The streets erupt in smoke and shrapnel. The Japanese infantry, trained for open-field maneuvers and decisive bayonet charges, find themselves fighting ghosts. The enemy is everywhere and nowhere. The Chinese defenders employ a tactic that the arrogant Isogai never simulated in his war games. They do not fight in the streets. they fight through the houses. Having bored holes through the connecting walls of adjacent buildings, Chinese squads move laterally through the town like termites, flanking the Japanese positions without ever stepping outside. A Japanese squad clears a room, only to be shot from behind through a hole in the plaster that wasn't there 5 minutes ago. And then comes the night. If the day belongs to the Japanese artillery, the night belongs to the Dadao. The Chinese 31st Division, low on ammunition, unleashes their big sword units. Under the cover of darkness, shirtless men carrying heavy, wide-bladed broadswords slip over the walls and into the Japanese-occupied sectors. There is no gunfire to give away positions, only the sickening wet thud of steel on bone. The psychological impact is devastating. The modern imperial soldier, drilled in the way of the rifle and the radio, finds himself brutally hacked down in a primal, visceral intimacy that technology cannot counter. Panic begins to spread through the Japanese ranks. The farmers are not running, they are hunting. By March 27th, the Japanese have occupied 2/3 of the town, but they are bleeding out. Every house taken costs a squad. Every street corner is a meat grinder. Isogai, furious and confused, doubles down. He pours more troops into the funnel, convinced that brute force will eventually shatter the resistance. He unknowingly sends them into a pocket that General Li Zongren is slowly, methodically sealing from the outside. The predator is becoming the prey. While the streets of Taierzhuang are being paved with blood and rubble, a different kind of horror is brewing for the Japanese outside the town walls. General Isogai, obsessed with crushing the stubborn defenders inside the city, has committed a cardinal sin of warfare. He has developed tunnel vision. He believes the Chinese troops maneuvering in the surrounding countryside are fleeing, scattered remnants of a broken army. He is wrong. They are not fleeing, they are forming a noose. To the north and east, the shadowy figures of the Chinese 20th Army Group, led by the formidable General Tang Enbo, emerge from the mist. For days, they have marched in secret, hiding in ravines and moving only at night to evade Japanese reconnaissance planes. Now, they strike. They do not hit the Japanese 10th Division head-on. They slice through the supply lines like a butcher's knife through gristle. The realization hits the Japanese field headquarters not with a bang, but with a terrifying silence. The radio calls for ammunition resupply go unanswered. The fuel trucks do not arrive. The artillery batteries, which had been firing with such arrogant impunity for days, suddenly fall quiet. They are conserving shells. The endless empire has run dry. Inside the town, the dynamic shifts instantly. The Chinese defenders, sensing the change in the air, launch a massive counterattack. It is a suicide charge, but this time it is synchronized with the external assault. The Japanese soldiers inside Taierzhuang are suddenly hit by a wave of claustrophobia. The enemy is in front of them with swords, and now the enemy is behind them with artillery. Panic, a sensation alien to the 10th Division, begins to set in. Commanders look at their maps and see the impossible. The farmers have executed a classic pincer movement, a maneuver Isogai thought them too primitive to understand. The Japanese tanks, once the spearhead of the invasion, are now low on fuel, immobile, and vulnerable. They are no longer predators. They are pillboxes, waiting to be cracked open. By the first days of April, the Japanese position disintegrates into chaos. Orders from Isogai become frantic and contradictory. Hold position. Break out. Attack. But there is nowhere to attack. The 5th Division, supposed to be their support to the west, is bogged down, unable or perhaps unwilling to break through the Chinese wall of flesh to save their rivals. The Japanese soldiers, exhausted, starving, and terrified of the night raids, look to the sky for salvation. But even the skies have turned against them. The low spring clouds obscure the battlefield, grounding the air support that was their only remaining advantage. For the first time in the war, the Imperial Japanese Army is not dictating the terms of engagement. They are trapped in a kill box of their own making, and the walls are closing in. The 6th of April, 1938. The order, when it finally comes, tastes like ash in the mouths of the imperial officers. Break out. It is a polite military euphemism for run for your lives. The retreat from Taierzhuang is not a maneuver, it is a hemorrhage. Under the cover of a pitch-black night, the remnants of the 10th Division attempt to slip out of the noose they so arrogantly stuck their heads into. But the Chinese commanders are not interested in letting them leave. As the Japanese columns try to move north, the surrounding hills controlled by Tang Enbo's forces erupt. The road back to Yixian becomes a highway of hell. The invincible modern machinery of the Japanese army creates a bottleneck of destruction. Trucks, laden with looted goods and ammunition, catch fire, illuminating the targets for Chinese mortar crews. Drivers abandon their vehicles, leaping into the freezing mud of the drainage ditches. The discipline that defined the Imperial Army evaporates. In the chaos, rank means nothing. Survival is the only order of the day. The visual landscape of the retreat is a tableau of humiliation. Along the muddy tracks, the once proud Type 89 tanks sit abandoned, their hatches open like gaping mouths. Crews have spiked the guns and drained the fuel before fleeing on foot, leaving the steel hulks as monuments to their failure. Heaps of equipment, winter coats, gas masks, officers' swords, and radios litter the ground. These are not just supplies, they are pieces of the Emperor's honor, discarded in the panic of escaping a peasant army. For the Chinese soldiers chasing them, the sight is intoxicating. They rush past the burning wreckage, scavenging rifles and ammunition from the dead Japanese rearguard. For the first time in a century of humiliation from the Opium Wars to the fall of Nanking, a Chinese army is looking at the backs of a fleeing invader. The psychological barrier is shattered. The Japanese are not demons. They are men. And they bleed. And they run. Inside the command tents of the retreating Japanese, the atmosphere is funereal. Officers weep openly. Some, unable to bear the shame of defeat, choose the traditional exit. The sharp crack of pistol shots rings out from the command trucks, suicides of captains and majors who cannot face the report they must send to Tokyo. General Isogai survives, but his reputation is dead. He has led the Emperor's finest into a meat grinder and brought back nothing but a list of 16,000 casualties. By April 7th, the guns around Taierzhuang finally fall silent. The town is a ruins, pulverized into gravel and dust. But above the broken walls, a tattered flag with a white sun on a blue sky still waves. The Japanese 10th Division has been broken. They have escaped, but they have left their soul on the battlefield. The myth of Japanese invincibility didn't just die here. It was slaughtered in the alleyways and buried in the mud. The news of Taierzhuang hits the world like a shockwave. In London, New York, and Paris, headlines that had long been resigned to reporting the inevitable Japanese conquest suddenly change their tune. Chinese defeat Japanese, screams the New York Times. For the first time, Western observers realize that the war in East Asia is not a mopping-up operation. It is a war. The image of the unstoppable samurai, forged in the victories against Russia in 1905 and solidified by the fall of Nanking, is cracked. The world sees that the Japanese military machine can jam, can break, and can be beaten. Inside China, the victory is electric. It is more than a military triumph. It is a resurrection of national spirit. In Hankow, parades erupt in the streets. Firecrackers pop all night, mimicking the gunfire of the front, but this time in celebration. The myth of inferiority, the deeply held fear that China was simply too weak, too divided, and too backward to stand against a modern industrial power evaporates. General Li Zongren becomes a national hero. The defense of Taierzhuang proves that when properly led and unified, the Chinese soldier is the equal of any on earth. However, the victory is Pyrrhic. The streets of Taierzhuang are choked with the dead. Over 30,000 Chinese soldiers gave their lives to hold the town. But they bought something more valuable than territory. They bought time. The defeat forces the Japanese High Command to pause, regroup, and completely rethink their strategy. They can no longer hope for a quick surrender. They are now dragged into the one thing they cannot win: a long, grinding war of attrition across a continent-sized landmass. The Battle of Taierzhuang did not stop the Japanese invasion. Suzhou would eventually fall weeks later as the Japanese regrouped with overwhelming force. But the momentum was gone. The 3-month timeline was dead. The psychological dominance was gone. Taierzhuang taught the Chinese army how to fight, and it taught the Japanese army fear. As the smoke clears over the Grand Canal in the spring of 1938, the landscape has changed forever. The Japanese army marched in as conquerors of a dying empire. They retreated as survivors of a new one. The sleeping giant of Asia did not just wake up at Taierzhuang. It stood up, picked up a sword, and drew blood. The blunder of the invincible army was not just losing a battle, it was starting a fight they could never finish.